All right. Well, good evening. It's been a beautiful day. I'm in the process of boiling my dishwater, and when I'm finished that, I'm going to make myself some fried egg sandwiches. That's going to be supper. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a story now. Rocky's outside here wandering around with me, too. I'm going to tell you a story now. Keep looking to see if my deer has come to eat. I'm a little concerned. I heard some gunshots over in the woods over that way, and it is deer season, so I'm a little concerned anyway. I hope she lives long enough to have a nice feed of pumpkin. That's all. I'm a little concerned about her. Anyway, I'll tell the story. Yeah, like I say, it's nature and it's just the way it goes. But still, she's a prey animal, so whatever happens, happens. But I still hope she'll be okay. I still do worry about her. But anyway, on with the story. Now, I should tell you, this story is going to have a little bit of off-color language in it, and there's going to be a little bit of it that's even kind of racist. But you got to bear in mind, this happened in 1974. It was a different world back then, and people didn't talk the way they talk now. They talked the way they talked in 1974, which was different. The world was different back then. And as I tell the story, you'll realize how different the world was. Those of you who were alive back then will remember, and those of you who weren't alive back then, well, you'll just know by the story I'm telling how different things were. In 1974, my dad still had the 1962 Pontiac Parisienne sedan, and I used to help my dad work on it. Usually Sunday afternoons we'd get the car in good shape so my dad could drive it to work for the week. That was the family car, and it was a pretty serious thing. We couldn't lose that car. If we lost the family car, that would create a great deal of hardship. So we had to keep the car running. That's the bottom line. And my dad had taught me some ski, took advantage of that situation to teach me different things when I was a little boy about cars and about how to do different things with cars and so on. And anyway, he taught me how to clean and adjust the ignition points and how to grease the suspension with a grease gun and all that stuff. Different things, different tools that you'd use. And I got that I would help him. I'd pass him tools, or I'd hold on to the end of something for him, or I'd hold a flashlight, or whatever he needed, I'd do it. Anyway, this one day, we were outside in the driveway on the weekend, and we had to do a job with the rear axle. Now, Pontiacs back in those times were kind of known for rear axle issues. They were a good car in most respects, but the rear axle seems to have been a bit of a weakness in them anyway. And our Pontiac, our 62 Pontiac Parisienne, was having some axle problems. The arsene was falling out of her, as they'd say, back then. The arsene was coming out of her. So we had to do something. So we're out there in the yard anyway with this car, arsing around with the arse end of the Pontiac. And our neighbor, Jack McParlin, come over. He offered to help us. Now, Jack McParlin was a mechanic at Waltz Texaco in Perth, in the town of Perth. And anyway, you never see a Texaco station anymore. Not around here, anyway. And this was Waltz Texaco. And it was situated where there is now a corner, one of those chain corner stores. It was Max Milk for years, and I don't know, I guess now it'd be Circle K or whatever, because all the Max Milk stores have been turned into Circle K stores. But anyway, just a little corner convenience store, like a 7-Eleven type store, that sort of thing. That's what's on that corner now. But when I was a little boy, it was a Texaco station called Waltz Texaco, and our neighbor Jack McParland worked there. He came over to help us. Anyway, a couple of days or 3 days or 4 days or whatever prior to this, the auction hall down the road from our place had burned down. Burned right to the ground. And just burnt right to the ground anyway. And we had actually gotten in the car and driven up there to see it. And we actually saw it burning. I remember that. when the fire trucks went up racing past there, we got in the car and followed them, and we saw the fire. Anyway, auction hall had burned to the ground. So that was big news around our neck of the woods. The auction hall down the road burning was big news anyway. And I remember Jack McParland. Well, I'll tell you, I was a little boy. I was 6 years old. So other than just to say, "Good morning, Mr. McParland," I didn't speak. Because when you were a little boy of 6 years old in 1974, when the men were talking, you kept your mouth shut. You weren't part of that, unless you were invited to speak, you kept quiet. That's how it was. It was a respect thing, and it was also, what happened though was I learned a lot of stuff because of that. You stand there and you listen and you hear things that you probably wouldn't hear otherwise, because they kind of forget you're there too, so they'll say things that maybe they wouldn't have said otherwise. And sometimes I'd hear something that would strike me kind of funny, and you had to be careful about laughing, because that would be taken as disrespect. If something serious was being spoken of, especially, and somebody said something that just struck you funny and you started laughing, and in those days, there were a lot of sayings that were quite clever and quite funny, and they make you kind of giggle a little bit when you heard them. But when you were a little kid back then, you had to be very careful that you didn't laugh at the wrong time. That'd get you into trouble. Anyway, my dad and Mr. McParland, Jack McParland, they got talking about the auction hall burning down the road. And my dad, this is the part now that's kind of racist and a little vulgar. My dad, he didn't mince words, and he was an old-fashioned tough guy type. So you got to bear that in mind too. And he wasn't shy about saying exactly what he thought, and he didn't care how it sounded. And my dad, with a Camel cigarette hanging out the corner of his mouth, smoking away there, he said, "It was a goddamn Jew fire." I remember they said it was a goddamn Jew fire, is what he said. And Mr. McParland, he said, yeah, he said, "I think that too." He said, "That's exactly what I think it was." Anyway, it was kind of I guess you could say, a stereotype of Jewish businessmen, that they would burn down a business for insurance money. And I guess they would do that too. Some of them did. But the thing is, now the auctioneer down the road wasn't Jewish, but still, if you had a suspicious fire, whether you were Jewish or not, it would be said that it was a Jew fire. That's what they used to call a suspicious fire, a Jew fire. Anyway, so that's what my dad said. Anyway, he said, it was a goddamn Jew fire is what it was. And I remember hearing that anyway, and I wasn't sure if I should laugh or not, really, because it was kind of a serious thing they were talking about. So I kind of was able to suppress my laughter until I got somewhere by myself where I could have a good laugh anyway, just thinking about what I heard. It was a goddamn Jew fire. Anyway, years later, when I was working for another auctioneer, this auctioneer's father worked for the auctioneer whose auction hall had burned. And I remember I told him that story, and he remembered when that happened, because as a little boy, he used to go with his dad to help out at work and so on, and he knew all about it. And he confirmed anyway that my dad was right. It was an arson fire. It was burnt down for insurance money, because the hall was getting in pretty rough shape and they needed a new hall, and they didn't want to have to pay to build one, so they burnt it down. That's what happened. But yeah, so anyway, my dad was right. I know nowadays he'd be considered wrong for phrasing it the way he did. But like I say, you got to remember the era we were in back then, and things were different. The world hasn't always been like it is now, and in some respects that was a good thing, and in some respects it wasn't. Anyway, it just struck me funny how my dad said that anyway, and I never forgot it. But cigarette hanging out the corner of his mouth, old Cameo mentholated cigarette. This is another thing that's funny. My dad had a bad cough, And the doctor had told him to smoke mentholated cigarettes. That was under doctor's orders that he was smoking a mentholated cigarette. I told him to switch to mentholated cigarettes rather than to smoke regular ones. Nowadays they tell you to stop smoking entirely, but they didn't do that back then. Anyway, that's the story. Different world we lived in. 62 Pontiacs with bad axles, Texaco stations, racial slurs, insurance fraud. It was all part of it. All right, we'll talk to you later.